4 days before Biggie's death, he was at an interview saying he wanted to be over with the beef.
But I'm here to take over and say that it's all over with. I'm in the West right now. If you need me, if you want to see me, talk to me, whatever you want to do, cool. Now's the time, call on up.
But people in death row didn't seem to be on that page. And 6 months after Tupac got shot in Las Vegas, he caught 4 fatal bullets himself. Nobody was charged, and the case seemed to be buried for almost 30 years. But with the Keffe D trial happening right now in Las Vegas, sworn testimony is coming out that changes what we know about that night, and it points in one direction. Suge.
Reggie Wright Sr. was a lieutenant with Compton Police Department, and then Reggie Wright Jr. was a former officer with the police department. He had then started a company called Right Way Security, and then he was working with Suge Knight, doing security. Yes, he said he believed that Reggie Wright Jr. and the blooded gang members associated with him were the ones responsible for killing Notorious B.I.G.
And the former lead investigator on Biggie's case has said it flat out.
I think Poochie was involved. I think Suge Knight orchestrated it.
Tupac's murder set in motion a chain of retaliatory events that shook the whole rap scene for decades. And you're about to hear what were Suge Knight's reasons to order the hit on Biggie, how the prime suspect ended up dead on a motorcycle in Compton before anyone could ever reach him, and why the man now sitting on trial for Tupac's murder was in that same building the night Biggie got shot and kept his mouth shut about what he saw for almost 30 years. Let me break it all down. Now, you gotta understand where this came from before any of it makes sense, because what took Tupac and Biggie was not something the music industry created out of nowhere. The music industry just plugged into something that was already running at full speed in the streets of Compton long before either of those men ever stepped in a studio. Compton is a small city in South LA, stretching about 10 square miles between Carson and Linwood. And by the mid-90s, those 10 square miles had over 30 gangs claiming territory inside them. The two that run every part of this story are the mob Piru Bloods on one side and the Southside Compton Crips on the other. Suge Knight grew up in Looters Park, a neighborhood in Compton that was deep mob Piru territory, and no amount of money or platinum records ever changed where he came from or who he stayed loyal to. When Death Row started printing money in the early 90s, Snoop and Dre and eventually Tupac were the faces on the posters, but the people actually moving through that building on a day-to-day basis, the security, the enforcers, the ones you called when something needed to get handled off the books, those were Piru people. That was the whole design of how Death Row operated at the time. Reggie Wright Jr., who would eventually become Death Row's head of security through his company Right Way Protective Services, testified at the Keffe D trial that he grew up about 2 blocks from Suge.
Who ran Death Row Records at that time?
A gentleman that I actually grew up with at elementary school, junior high, and high school by the name of Suge Knight.
His father, Reggie Wright Sr., was a lieutenant at the Compton Police Department running the Gang Investigations Unit, which meant the Wright family had a foot in the official law enforcement world and a foot in everything adjacent to it, and that position eventually became relevant in ways nobody anticipated. Across those same 10 miles, Dwayne Keith Davis, Keffe D, had built something completely separate from the music industry. Pure drug trafficking, nationwide, multi-million dollars moving through his organization at any given time, and he said so himself in his own book and interviews without even flinching about it.
Basically, you sell drugs to be successful to get up out that and to get out the gang and all that, so you can provide for your family.
He ran the Burris Street faction of the Southside Compton Crips, and the way you earn that kind of position in that world is simple. You bring money in, you protect your people, and you handle your business. His nephew was Orlando Anderson, going by the moniker Baby Lane, also Southside, also well-respected, and the kind of person where somebody putting their hands on him was never just a personal beef. And that one detail is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. Now, here is the piece that most tellings of this story either skip or underplay, and the prosecution confirmed it explicitly in their opening statement at the trial. Through a Harlem drug dealer named Eric Martin, who everybody knew as Zip, Keffe D had built a connection that ran all the way to Diddy's World in New York. Zip was moving product between coasts, had deep ties to the Southside Crips through years in the drug game, and he also had a relationship with Bad Boy Records. He was the bridge between the East Coast music money and the West Coast gang muscle, the one man who existed comfortably in both worlds at the same time. When Bad Boy came to Los Angeles, Diddy had a real problem. Suge Knight and the mob Pyru Bloods were the power on the West Coast, and if you were from New York moving through Compton or South Central, you needed somebody on the ground who could guarantee your people did not get touched. Now, the mob Pyru and the Southside Compton Crips were two rival gangs sharing the same 10 miles of city with a long history of violence between them. So having Crips on your side when you came west was not just muscle, it was the right muscle, the specific people that Suge's world had issues with. Through Zip, an arrangement got made. The Southside Compton Crips would act as unofficial security for Diddy and his artists whenever they came west, specifically to make sure nothing jumped off with Mob Pyru and Death Row. The prosecution confirmed this in their opening.
Sean Combs wanted some security when he came out to the West Coast. He was worried about Mob Pyru. He was worried about the members of Death Row Records. And so Dwayne Keffe D. Davis agreed to be around to act as unofficial security for Sean Combs and his artists when they came out west. In order specifically to ensure there are no problems with Mob Pyru and Death Row Records.
And then Mob James McDonald, who testified on day 2 of this trial under court order because he absolutely did not want to be there. A 61-year-old grandfather in an Atlanta Braves cap who declared himself a hostile witness before they even got into the real questions, put the whole thing into one sentence that explained the East-West War better than 30 years of documentaries had managed to.
I'm raising my grandkids, teaching them never to be like their papa.
In simple terms, Bad Boy went to Keffe D. Death Row came to the mob Pyru. That is what you have to understand in the war before you get into everything else. 2 record labels plugged directly into 2 sides of a gang conflict that had been running in Compton for decades. And the moment those labels started going at each other publicly, the gang war underneath them stopped being cold. Now, we need to go through Biggie's background because the weight of what happened to him only hits right if you understand what was lost. Biggie grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. Bed-Stuy at the end of the 1980s and into the early 90s was its own world operating by its own set of rules, and Biggie absorbed all of it. He started dealing crack as a teenager, got arrested twice, did time in North Carolina, came home to Brooklyn and kept moving. But the music was always there running parallel to everything else. He was rhyming on blocks while he was still running. By the time he was 17, people in Brooklyn already knew that voice was something completely different. Diddy signed him to Bad Boy Records, and Ready to Die came out in September '94. It was an immediate landmark, not just a good rap album, a complete artistic statement. He became the biggest rapper on the East Coast almost immediately. By 1995 and into 1996, when the Coast War was starting to run hot, he was genuinely in the conversation for the biggest rapper anywhere in the country, which meant that without having done a single thing to create the situation he found himself in, he was the most visible target on the East Coast side of a war he had not started and could not exit. And here's the part of this story that gets buried under the mythology of the beef. Before any of this became a war, Biggie and Tupac were actually cool with each other. They had met early in their careers, moved in overlapping circles, genuinely respected each other's work. Tupac was among the first established artists to reach out and show Biggie real love when Ready to Die dropped. They were not enemies by nature. They got turned into enemies by what happened one night in November 1994 and by the business and political pressures that surrounded them on opposite sides of a manufactured coast rivalry that neither of them chose and that both of them ultimately paid for with their lives. That night in November 1994, Tupac went to Quad Recording Studios in New York for a session. In the lobby, multiple men robbed and shot him 5 times. Hand, head, groin, leg. He survived, got released from the hospital the next day, on the way to his own sentencing in a wheelchair just to show the world he was still standing. And he was convinced that Diddy and Biggie were connected to the people who set him up. Whether Diddy and Biggie were actually involved is a question that was never resolved because no charges were ever filed. Biggie denied it until he died, but Tupac believed it was real, and it changed everything that came after. In 1995, Tupac was sitting in federal prison at Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York on a assault conviction. Broke, with appeals failing and no light ahead. The East Coast had gone cold on him. Then Suge Knight came to visit him behind bars and made an offer. Signed to Death Row, and Death Row posts the bail and gets him out. Tupac signed from behind bars, and the moment he walked out of that prison, he was no longer just a West Coast rapper. He was in the Death Row orbit, backed by Mob Pyru, aligned against Bad Boy and everything connected to it, and he made that alignment as loud as it could possibly be. Hit 'Em Up dropped in the summer of 1996, and it it was the most aggressive rap diss ever recorded in the history of the music. He went after Biggie directly, after Diddy, after the whole Bad Boy roster. He made it personal and he made it permanent. After that record, there was no walking anything back on either side. Then in August 1995 at the Source Awards at Madison Square Garden in New York, Death Row walked into Bad Boy territory and Suge Knight did not act like a guest. He got on that stage and said that if you are an artist who does not want your label boss appearing in your videos, dancing around in your music, come sign to Death Row.
Any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
A direct public shot at Diddy, who was famous for exactly that. The crowd booed him. Snoop told New York to say Death Row's name, and the boos got louder. Then Diddy took the stage and spoke about peace and unity, and the New York crowd gave him applause. And that contrast right there told you the whole story. Suge was the aggressor, walking into the other side's territory and disrespecting them in front of their own audience. Diddy was playing peacemaker publicly while the South Side Crips were handling his West Coast security in the background. Both sides knew exactly what the other was doing. They were just performing different roles for the same room. By 1996, the words had turned into something physical. At the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles, the two worlds met face to face in a parking lot. Reggie Wright Jr. testified at the Keffe D trial about what he saw that day. Tupac spotted Biggie and Diddy's entourage, along with people Wright recognized from the Southside Crips who were serving as their West Coast security presence, and he immediately went into a rage. A confrontation broke out between the two camps. And then, one of the people on the Bad Boy/Crip side pulled out a firearm. Wright testified that he drew his own weapon and begged the man not to raise the gun. Nation of Islam security stepped in between them. The armed man and several people with him ran.
Mr. Shakur saw Christopher Wallace and Puffy and a group of people, a few guys that I recognized from the South Side, in that entourage. As they were, Mr. Shakur immediately became enraged and started yelling, and confrontation between Mr. Small, Biggie, and Mr. Shakur took place to the point where one of their guys brandished a weapon. And then that's when I pulled my firearm towards him and begged with him, pleaded with him not to raise the gun.
Now here is a detail that matters for understanding exactly what lit the fuse on September 7th. That summer 1996, Trayvon Lane, a mob Pyru blood who ran with the Death Row camp, was at Lakewood Mall in Compton. He had on a Death Row medallion chain, a Christmas gift from Suge himself, which in that world is not just jewelry. It is a statement about who you are and who you are with. Also at Lakewood Mall that day was Orlando Anderson, Keffe D's nephew from the Southside Compton Crips. A fight broke out between the two sides, and during that fight, the chain got snatched off Trayvon Lane's neck. What happened to the chain afterward is disputed. Not everyone agrees on every detail, but the chain was never the point. The point was what the act of taking it meant. And that moment at Lakewood Mall was the fuse to everything that followed, up to the Biggie's death in '97. So by the summer of 1996, you already had a Source Award speech declaring a public war, a 1994 shooting where Tupac was blaming Biggie and Diddy, a diss track that made the entire thing permanent, a Soul Train confrontation where someone on the Bad Boy side pulled a gun at a music industry event, and the Lakewood Mall chain incident, giving the street side of the conflict their own specific unsettled grievance. Everything was already burning before September 7th even happened. Now you already know the broad strokes of what happened on September 7th, 1996. Long story short, Mike Tyson fought Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand and Tupac attended it with his crew. A lobby fight broke out. Tupac and the Death Row crew jumped Orlando Anderson after Trayvon Lane spotted him standing alone. Keffe D with his crew jumped in a white Cadillac to avenge for getting a kid beaten up. Tupac got shot on Flamingo and Cobalt and died 6 days later at 25 years old. What matters for the Biggie story is what happened in Compton the moment word got back, because the war that started the night Tupac was shot did not wait for anything to develop. Mob James testified about how he felt it coming the moment news reached Club 662 that night, and why he and everyone on their side of the conflict went straight back to Compton before the night was even over.
At the time, there was no at war, it was peace. And when the two record companies got into it, Bad Boy went to Keffe D now, and Suge came to us. So that intertwined everything, and we had issues.
And when Mob James was pressed on what exactly those neighborhood issues looked like, what the response was in Compton in those days and weeks after Tupac died, he shut down completely.
Are you sure you want me to answer that?
The prosecutor confirmed in the opening what the record shows. Within 10 days of Tupac's murder, 3 people were killed in Compton. Several more were shot, including an 11-year-old girl, and not one of those cases was ever prosecuted. Because in that world, as the prosecution put it plainly, silence means survival. And nobody on either side of that conflict was about to start talking. Now here is the shift that connects directly to Biggie's murder, and the timing here is everything. After the MGM Grand Lobby fight, where Tupac and the Death Row crew had jumped and stomped Orlando Anderson on camera in a hotel lobby, California authorities used that incident as a probation violation against Suge Knight. He had a prior assault conviction. The MGM fight was all the documentation they needed. By February 1997, Suge Knight was sitting in the Los Angeles County Jail, not yet serving a long sentence at this stage, but locked up watching his label fall apart with Tupac dead and the most volatile period in the history of this conflict running in the streets outside. He was sitting in the county, but he was also still in contact with people from his world through visits and phone calls. And according to what retired LAPD detective Greg Kading eventually uncovered when he investigated Biggie's murder years later, was Suge called in preparation to take out Biggie later that year. In 1998, the feds built a drug trafficking case against Keffe D and brought him in for a proffer session. Wade Lee, the FBI agent present, testified about it on day 3 of the Tupac trial. Davis denied any involvement in Tupac's murder, but when agents asked him to speculate on who did it, the man now on trial for organizing that murder told them it was probably corrupt Compton police working for Suge.
Reggie Wright Sr. was a lieutenant with Compton Police Department, and then Reggie Wright Jr. was a former officer with the police department. He had then started a company called Right Way Security, and then he was working with Suge Knight, doing security.
And then the agent showed him a composite of Biggie's shooter. Davis told them it looked just like Reggie Wright Jr., that he personally saw Wright at the Petersen Museum party the night Biggie was killed, and that he believed Mob Piru Blood gang members carried out the hit.
Yes, he said he believed that Reggie Wright Jr. and the Blood gang members associated with him were the ones responsible for killing Notorious B.I.G. When asked who the individual was who actually killed him.
Then came late March 1997. Biggie was in Los Angeles promoting life after death, giving interviews about wanting to move past the beef. Specifically his last interview, calling out to end the beef.
But I'm here to take over and say that it's all over with. I'm in the West right now. If you need me, if you want to see me, talk to me, whatever you want to do, cool. Now's the time, call on up.
Biggie wanted to be over with it, but people in death row didn't seem to share the same thoughts. On the evening of March 8th, he and the bad boy entourage went to an after party at the Petersen Automotive Museum on Wilshire Boulevard. Over 1,000 people were there. Faith Evans, Queen Latifah, Busta Rhymes, and members of both the Bloods and the Crips in that same building. A fight broke out inside the museum late in the party. They shut the whole event down early. And here is something that matters when you think about what happened next. That fight was not between death row people and bad boy people. It was between 2 rival gang sets who happened to be at the same industry party. But in that world, when a fight breaks out and one side is in the process of trying to organize a hit that they are still positioning for, a fight that shuts a party down early and pushes everyone out the door at once is exactly the kind of controlled chaos that makes an operation easier to execute. Just after midnight, the bad boy convoy left in 3 SUVs. Diddy's vehicle was in front. Biggie was in the second car, a green GMC Suburban sitting in the front passenger seat. Security blazer behind him. At the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and Fairfax Avenue, a dark Chevrolet Impala with fancy rims pulled up on the right side of Biggie's Suburban. The driver lowered his window. He fired 6 times, hitting Biggie 4 times. The fatal shot went through his colon, liver, heart, heart and his left lung. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center and pronounced dead at 1:15 in the morning. LAPD Detective Fred Miller, who ran the Biggie murder investigation and testified in the Keffe D trial, described exactly what investigators found at the scene.
He received, I believe, 4 9mm projectiles to his body that caused his demise. He was sitting in the right passenger seat of his limousine that was leaving the museum.
So I think what you just said was was a newer model Chevy Impala SS that was dark in color. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
Miller also testified that Dwayne Davis had come up as a suspect early in his investigation because Davis was at the party that night and owned a black 1996 Chevy Impala SS, registered to an associate named Patrick Parker at 1524 California, which was Davis's address. They checked it but cleared him afterwards, and the judge in the Tupac trial instructed the jury directly. Neither the court nor the LAPD believe at this point that Davis was involved in Biggie's murder. The 1997 recording that was played in the Tupac trial, Davis voluntarily sitting down with LAPD to explain his whereabouts that night, gives you a window into what you are dealing with. He told detectives he was in a green 1995 Oldsmobile rental car, not the black Impala. He was on the first level of the parking structure waiting for the valet. He heard people saying, "Biggie got shot," and the crowd started running. He left, went to Jerry's Deli in the marina with a friend, drove home by around 2:30 in the morning.
I was in a green color.
The man who 10 years later would be telling Vlad TV everything about Tupac's murder was sitting across from LAPD in 1997, giving them absolutely nothing about Biggie's. So they cleared him and the case stayed cold. Before Kading got the Biggie case, a detective named Russell Poole had run an earlier investigation pointing toward a corrupt LAPD officer named David Mack, a blood gang member working off-duty security for death row, who Poole believed helped coordinate the hit through a man named Amir Muhammad. That theory gained enough traction that Biggie's mother, Voletta Wallace, sued the city of Los Angeles for wrongful death, and the city settled for around $7.5 million to avoid airing LAPD's internal corruption in open court. So by the time Kading took over in 2006, the case had already burned through one major theory, a multi-million-dollar settlement and 8 years of cold case sitting. What Kading eventually uncovered pointed toward a woman named Teresa Swan, who had a long history with Suge Knight and who told him what she says happened when she visited Suge at the Los Angeles County Jail in February 1997, 1 month before Biggie was killed. Suge was locked up furious watching his label collapse. And according to Swan, he told her to contact a man named Wardell Faust, find out the price, and make the arrangement.
I think Poochie was involved. I think Suge Knight orchestrated it.
Poochie was Mob Piru Blood, death row bodyguard, with a criminal history going back to a 1991 home invasion murder. And Suge Knight had recently purchased him a Chevrolet Impala. Same make, same model, same year as the suspect vehicle witnesses described at the Petersen Museum. The amount Kading says changed hands was $13,000. On July 24, 2003, Poochie was shot and killed on his motorcycle in Compton, an unrelated gang incident, dead before any of it could be assembled into something with a chance of going to a grand jury. Swan's account of a private conversation with a man in a jail cell with no corroborating witness who can be compelled to testify was never enough to charge Suge Knight. He has denied any connection to Biggie's murder for 30 years with no legal consequence attached to any of it. Now here is the thing that makes this whole situation almost impossible to fully sit with. In 1998, when Keffe D sat down with FBI agents trying to navigate the drug trafficking case against him, he told them a story where Suge Knight's people killed Tupac and Reggie Wright Jr. killed Biggie. He was pointing at the death row side as guilty in both murders. He was deflecting completely from himself and Orlando. But the theory that Greg Kading eventually developed after years of investigating both both murders points at the same world Davis described, just from a different angle. The death row side, specifically Suge Knight and his mob Pyru network, killed Biggie in retaliation for what the Crips/Bad Boy side did to Tupac. Davis in 1998 was describing the motives and the actors correctly. He was just leaving himself out of the part where he organized the first murder that made all of it inevitable. The architecture is the same in both Davis's 1998 FBI account and in Kading's investigation. Mob Pyru connected people killed Biggie because Crips connected to Bad Boy killed Tupac. Both versions put the same faction at the center, the people with the deepest motive. The people who loved Tupac and watched the label that loved him fall apart in the 6 months after he died. And the people who had shown through the violence in Compton in those 10 days after September 7th that they were not going to let what happened to Tupac go unanswered. Davis was telling the FBI that was what happened. He just was not saying he was the one who organized the Tupac killing that set the whole chain in motion. And the only person who could have definitively confirmed or denied which specific mob Pyru member pulled the trigger on Wilshire Boulevard was shot and killed on a motorcycle in Compton 6 years before any of this became a public legal proceeding. Now let me bring it all the way back to Las Vegas in August 2026, because what this trial did that 30 years of documentaries, books, and investigations never managed is put the framework of both murders on the public legal record under oath. Mob James McDonald, court ordered to be there against his will, sitting in an Atlanta Braves cap and making it clear he did not want to answer anything he did not have to, still confirmed the complete structure. Bad Boy went to Keffe D and the Southside Crips. Death Row came to the mob Pyru Bloods. Both sides of that alignment were pulled into active war because of the music industry beef. And when Tupac was killed by one side of that alignment, the other side was always going to respond. That is now in the public record as sworn testimony from a man who was inside it when it was happening and still had enough loyalty 30 years later that he refused to elaborate on what form that response took. And Mob James also shut down the defense's theory that Reggie Wright Jr. had organized Tupac's killing because he understood immediately what the logic of that argument required, and it did not hold.
If Reggie killed Tupac, then Death Row is over with. Tupac was the money source. Tupac was that guy at Death Row. So Reggie would have had a problem if he would have did that. And Suge, I truly believe Suge would have opened his mouth if Reggie betrayed him like that.
Nobody on the Death Row or Mob Pyru side had a reason to kill the person who was making all of them money. The logic of retaliation only flows in one direction. The Crips and Bad Boy side killed Tupac. The Bloods and Death Row side killed Biggie in response. That is what Mob James was protecting when he looked at the defense attorney and said, "You do not want me to answer that question." He knew exactly what the answer was. He was never going to say it in front of a jury. And then Wade Lee's testimony on day 3 added the piece that changes the way you read everything Davis has ever said publicly about either of these murders. In 1998, in a secret session with the FBI, Keffe D was placing Reggie Wright Jr. at the Petersen Museum the night Biggie died. He was identifying Wright as looking like the composite of the shooter. He was connecting Death Row-associated blood gang members to the killing. He was doing all of this to deflect from himself and Orlando, but in the process, he was accurately describing the world in which the retaliation happened, the people who had the motive, the infrastructure, and the history of violence to respond to what the Crips side had done. What we have now is Suge sitting in prison at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He is serving 28 years for the 2015 hit and run. He will not be eligible for parole until 2034 when he will be 69 years old. His attorneys have been challenging his sentence without success. He has never been charged with anything connected to Biggie's murder, which can lead to an additional sentence of life if convicted. Keffe D is in that Las Vegas courtroom right now, 63 years old, watching his own words from 15 years of books, podcasts, and Vlad TV interviews get used as the prosecution's case against him for Tupac's murder. He rejected a plea deal before the trial started and is taking his chances with a jury. He is the only living person who was in that white Cadillac on September 7th, 1996. And every day of testimony in Las Vegas adds more sworn testimony to the public record about the world that produced both of these murders. Wardell Poochie Faust, the man Greg Kading believes drove a dark Chevrolet Impala to Wilshire Boulevard and pulled up alongside Biggie's Suburban and fired 6 times, has been dead since July 24, 24, 2003. He cannot testify. He cannot be charged. The most likely answer to who physically killed Christopher Wallace cannot speak. And Valletta Wallace waited 30 years after a $7.5 million settlement with a city that would not say what it knew in open court. After 2 major investigations that both named suspects neither of them could charge. 2 competing theories, and not one person ever brought to trial for what happened to her son on that Los Angeles street in March 1997. She passed away in February 2025, still without an answer. What happened in that courtroom in Las Vegas over the past several weeks is genuinely unlike anything that has existed before in this case. 30 years of a story that everybody thought they knew, and now for the first time you have sworn testimony, trial transcripts, actual clips of witnesses saying these things on the record. Keffe D sitting at the defense table, the chain from Lakewood Mall, the MGM lobby, September 7th, 6 months later on Wilshire Boulevard. All of it finally inside a courtroom. And the thing that stays with you is how connected the 2 murders are. 2 rappers who used to be cool, both shot at red lights, both in the front passenger seat 6 months apart. One war that nobody could control once Tupac got shot. One trial is finally happening now, 3 decades late. And Biggie's murder still sitting in a cold case file with no charges and no justice for the East Coast legend. The Keffe D trial is still running and more testimony is coming. Every piece that goes into that record adds to what we actually know about both of these cases in a way that has never been possible before. We are going to keep going through all of it. If you made it this far, the videos on screen are probably exactly what you want next. Take care.